This video introduces the United States Port State Control Program. We will explain the purpose and parameters of the United States Coast Guard and Customs and Border Protection examinations for vessels entering U.S. ports. We will also look at recent changes to the U.S. Port State Control Program. A successful port state examination begins when the crew members at the gangway do a thorough inspection of the boarding officer's credential. This is a requirement in the ISPS code and indicates to the boarding officers that the crew and vessel are shipshape and ready for the port state examination.
The Port State Control Program is intended to elevate all shipping to the level that we believe the U.S. shipping fleet is at, and for the protection of those crews on those vessels, for the protection of U.S. ports, and for the protection of the United States environment.
We'll show you important procedures to follow before, during, and after a port state control inspection. These guidelines can save you time and money. Port state control programs ensure that ships meet international standards. These standards are based on international conventions and agreements. These agreements include SOLAS, MARPOL, STCW, ILLC, and ILO 147.
Our primary purpose of coming on board is to ensure that the people that do the regular inspections on the ship are in fact doing their job, and that the crew and the officers are maintaining that level of training and maintenance on board the vessel to where they comply with all of the rules and regulations.
This film will walk you through different aspects of U.S. port state control. First, we will look at Coast Guard safety and security examinations. Next, we will focus on immigration examinations conducted by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP. These visits are now mandatory for every foreign flag vessel. Finally, we will look at the agricultural examinations also conducted by CBP. More than 90% of maritime trade in U.S. ports involves foreign flag vessels. Most of these vessels operate safely within IMO standards. However, some vessels arrive from flag states or classification societies with poor detention records.
You can get your certificate from a nation that doesn't have a single river, lake, or coastal lines. They'll issue whatever paperwork you need to get that business, but if they come to port states such as U.S., then we're going to be aggressive to ensure that they meet the standard that International Maritime Organization has agreed to.
Foreign ships entering U.S. ports are placed into a targeting matrix to determine whether they will be boarded. The boarding criteria include the ship's age and type, its boarding history, the record of the owner-operator, the flag state and its record, the ship's classification society, and the ship's last ports of call.
We take them through a boarding matrix, targeting matrix, to determine whether or not they meet the criteria for boarding, and then we establish a prioritization of those vessels that are coming into port with the resources that we have at our disposal to actually inspect them.
The Coast Guard will not inform your ship of an examination in advance. They will always arrive without warning. Typical examinations take between 2 and 4 hours. The tests, questions, and demonstrations required will be at the discretion of the Port State Control examiners. Well-maintained vessels with prepared officers and crew will have more efficient examinations. If examiners find causes for concern, they will most likely expand their inspections. Expanded inspections can lead to many deficiencies being found. They can cost a vessel time and money.
When you go on board a vessel and the captain is there to greet you, and they have all the documents in place, then you can get the feel that these are people who know what they're doing, they're professionals, and they're going to have a good maintenance program on board.
The Coast Guard asked specifically that one engineer and one deck officer, both with handheld radios, accompany examiners throughout their visit. Coast Guard examiners inspect many aspects of the vessel: documentation, overall maintenance and operation, steering and navigation, environmental protection systems, and life-saving and firefighting equipment and procedures. Now, let's look at each of these in more detail. The first step in an examination is usually a review of the ship's documentation. The vessel must have certificates required for its type, build, tonnage, and cargo. In addition to the manning documentation, examiners may also focus on the document of compliance and safety, the Safety Management Certificate, and the Oil Record Book. Preparation for an examination of your documents should take place long before the inspection begins. Keep accurate, honest records. Initial any ledger mistakes so they're clearly marked. And remember, presentation of a falsified log is a crime in the United States. If all documentation is in order, examiners will usually begin their visual inspection by walking the vessel's exterior and examining its overall maintenance. The engineer and deck officer should continue to accompany the examiners to answer questions. The master may also choose to go along.
When we walk up to a vessel, your first impression is right there. And although the crew doesn't necessarily have, control over, when the last time it was in dry dock and got painted and all that, you get a feeling after doing this for a long time whether the ship is being maintained on a day-to-day basis or not.
In addition to demonstrating knowledge about the vessel's equipment, crew members should prepare for an inspection of their living quarters.
We're also concerned about how the crew is being treated on board a vessel. That they're being fed in areas that are free of insects, and that the food preparation areas are clean. We're basically looking at almost every aspect of the ship to get a whole picture of how the crew and the officers are performing.
Few systems are so important to a vessel's safety as its navigation and steering systems. The navigation system examination will take place on the bridge or anywhere on the ship where the vessel can be steered.
These are the radars, JRC, the newly installed radars.
If a vessel relies on electronic navigation systems, such as ECDIS, examiners will check that it is operated properly. Compasses, radars, rudder angle indicator, propulsion controls, positioning devices, and communication gear all are subject to test and demonstration. Steering is checked both on the bridge and below deck. Examiners will be especially interested in seeing that a ship's emergency steering is properly functioning. A key test involves running both of a vessel's generators, manually steering, and then verifying the ship's heading with the bridge. Most environmental requirements for entering a U.S. port are now covered by the Environmental Protection Agency's Vessel General Permit, or VGP program. Vessels entering the U.S. are required to be licensed under this VGP program. If you have not already done so, be sure to file a Notice of Intent, or NOI, today. Oil and water just don't mix. Examiners will ask for a demonstration of the oily water separator. They may also ask for a demonstration of the bilge alarm. Be sure that crew members responsible for demonstrating these tasks are ready to perform.
A primary focus of our boarding is to ensure that there won't be an accident, there won't be a spill, And also it goes a little bit beyond just checking the oily water separator in the oil record book. In the machinery spaces, we're also looking at whether there's excessive leakage of the machinery, whether there's oil all over the deck, if they're using cans, drip cans, and if there's excessive amount of rags. And, it's an indication to us there could be a potential fire hazard or a housekeeping problem on that vessel that could contribute to a fire hazard.
Bunkering procedures will also be carefully monitored. Examiners will test the containment and shutoff valves which prevent spillovers. As with the oily water separator, the emphasis in bunkering will be as much on the crew's performance as the ship's. Inspectors may ask you to demonstrate firefighting or even an abandoned ship drill. Make sure you can demonstrate clear communication between officers and crew and between the bridge and other areas on board.
I think the crew on board, first of all, should be glad that Coast Guard is coming on board, because we're going to ensure the safety of vessel so it doesn't cause harm to our ports, and doing so, we're ensuring their safety as well.
The Coast Guard may examine fire pumps, hoses, and extinguishers. They may look at the emergency generators, as well as smoke and gas detectors. They may also examine lifeboats to ensure that the engines and limit switches are working properly.
There should be no reason anybody should be afraid of, say, Coast Guard boardings. And we would like it if chief engineer or the captain let us know what problems they're experiencing and what they propose to do about it. That would be a lot better than if we were to go and find problems and they deny, or they say, oh, I didn't know about this.
Once you enter the United States, your vessel is subject to a visit from Customs and Border Protection, or CBP. Those CBP officers have two purposes when they visit your vessel. First, they determine if crew members are eligible to enter the U.S. Second, should any crew member be refused admission and asked to remain on board, CBP officers will enforce that decision.
The passenger port state control, basically you want to make sure you have your passport. If you have a visa, have that presented. Present yourself and answer the questions the officer asks.
This is the captain, all crew to BMC, all crew members to BMC, please.
When CBP officers board your vessel, the crew should muster at the appointed inspection area. Crew members should not bring any tools or headgear. They should be prepared to answer general questions from CBP officers. Most importantly, all crew members should meet the CBP officers with proper documentation already in hand. This should always include a passport or seaman's book, which is valid for at least 6 months after the date of entering the United States.
When you go to answer the question, if I ask where you joined, I'd like to know the approximate date you joined or signed onto the vessel. If I ask what your nationality is, just say if I happen to be German, I'm German on there. If I ask if you know anybody or have any friends or relatives in the U.S., if you do, just tell me. Many times we may already know the answers because you just handed us the documents and we're asking what's on the documents.
In addition, unless a crew member has an exemption waiver, a non-immigrant visa, or NIV, is also required. The NIV must be a D classification for all alien crew members. Crew members should also fill out a Customs Declaration, CBP 6059B form.
What's your position on board?
Oiler, sir.
CBP officers will either grant crew members landing rights with shore leave or detain crew members on the vessel. If denied landing rights, crew members must remain on board the vessel for the duration of its stay in a U.S. port. Crew members who wish to sign off a vessel should complete that process during the immigration inspection. They must provide the following information: reason for separation, flight details, completed I-408 form signed by the master or vessel agent, and a CBP 5129 declaration form.
The thing that delays the inspection, that I'd call a problem, is many times just the paperwork is not ready to go. The shore passes need to be presented already filled out. The crew list needs to be signed by the master or the captain of the vessel. They need to have, if they be signing off, they need to have the paperwork. They need to have either an email or their itinerary from the airline to sign off the ship as a D2. Going through on those. Anytime they don't have one of those things, it delays things and usually costs the vessel or the shipping line money.
The CBP agricultural examiners will focus on three primary areas: garbage, food stores, and animals, pests, and insects, particularly Asian gypsy moths.
The major thing that we find vessels having problems with are with the garbage that is kept outside on the deck of the vessel.
How a vessel manages its garbage is a good indicator of its overall cleanliness and maintenance. Agricultural inspectors will examine all garbage kept on deck to ensure that it is covered, leak-proof, and inside railings.
And if it is not in that condition when we get on board, it carries a $1,000 penalty.
In addition to a vessel's garbage, inspectors will also closely examine a vessel's stores, including frozen meats, fresh fruits and vegetables, and dry stores. Inspectors will look for cleanliness and appropriate expiration dates. They'll check food for rot, mold, and other spores.
One of the largest pests that we're looking for is actually in the dry stores. It's something called the Capra beetle, and it's found mostly in the Middle East, Northern Africa, India region of the world. And if they purchase provisions, dry provisions like rice, beans, stuff like that, in that part of the world, if the vessel visits there, they're presenting a threat to bringing that on board their vessel.
Insect infestations will garner a lot of attention from agricultural inspectors. Crews should be proactive in eliminating infestations before they become major problems. At present, Asian gypsy moths present the largest agricultural threat from vessels. Vessels found to have numerous Asian gypsy moth egg masses on board may be ordered out of U.S. waters.
If we find Asian gypsy moth egg masses infesting a vessel, we coordinate with the USDA, and usually that vessel could be kicked out of the United States. It would have to immediately leave U.S. waters. It would not be allowed to discharge cargo. It would leave U.S. waters immediately, or as soon as possible.
Most port state control inspections do not end in detainment. In fact, in 2010, more than 9,000 vessels made over 76,000 port calls in U.S. ports, and only 173 vessels were detained as a result of port state control inspections. However, just because a ship hasn't been detained does not mean inspectors won't make recommendations for improvement. Port state control reports will often identify minor deficiencies or areas in which a vessel can improve before future inspections. In the event of major problems, a vessel may be detained. If your vessel is detained, immediately ask the port state control officers for a detailed report and explanation of the detention.
Really, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing every single day and you're familiar with what a port state control exam is all about, there should be no reason to worry about failing it or having any problems with it. I mean, the important thing is to just, know what your job is and do it well.